Good afternoon, and welcome to the Northern Berkshire Adult Education Program ABE Language Arts class. Before Linda starts class, we just wanted to take some time to to update you on what's going on in the program. My name is Bob Boquette. I'm the director of the Northern Berkshire Adult Education Program, and just wanted to share some things that have happened since we first did this about 5 weeks ago. The program is, as you can see, up and running, and we are still enrolling students for classes for the fall semester. And some of our classes are offered remotely, so they're totally online. And then we have a series of classes that are meeting face-to-face fully, our beginner level classes, our very basic level class. And then our PASE, ASE language arts class, which is the class that Linda teaches, is meeting in a hybrid model. So some students are coming to our site at Drury High School, and other students are zooming into the class from home. So there are a number of options available for attending class. So we encourage you, if you're interested, to reach out to us. The requirements in order to enroll in our program: you must be at least 16 years of age and have officially withdrawn from high school. And if you're between 16 and 18, we need an official letter of withdrawal from the school indicating that you have withdrawn prior to your enrolling in our program. The classes that we offer, I said we have a very beginner level class, our ABE level class, which is the basics. Our ASE, PASE level classes are the moderate to intermediate class. Those are designed more for the Massachusetts high school credential preparation test, so those classes are available. And we have an employability skills program that's focused on health services and social service related careers. That class is meeting online. And we have an ESL program, English for Speakers of Other Languages. That class is also meeting totally remotely. So lots of opportunities to engage with the program and to get involved. Enrollments are being conducted, they can be conducted by phone, over the internet using Zoom or Google Meets, one of the video conferencing platforms, or we have scheduled some in-person meetings for students to come in to complete the enrollment process and give them some more information about the program. You can contact us by phone. The office number is 413-662-5386. Again, that's 413-662-5386. Or at the beginning of the program, there is an email address, northernberkshireae@gmail.com. You can send an email to that address, and we will reach out to you to schedule time to talk. Thank you, Linda, for the opportunity to update everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. It's been exciting this fall, and we're seeing a lot of our returning students that are coming back, and I think the program has provided many different ways to engage in the activities that you knew before, but as Bob said, we're up at Drury. That's our site now. And you can come in if you wish to. We have masks. Everybody, there's 6 to a room, so we're 6 feet apart, and we're really very serious about the safety of our students also. So this week, what I'd like to do is, we've been talking about The Outsiders, and that was a fiction book. And I want to go over this week what the difference is between fiction and nonfiction. So in our fiction book of The Outsiders, I showed you the story mountain diagram, and let me just go over this a little bit. And I'm at the whiteboard now. So in analyzing fiction, there were these particular elements in fiction. We talked about character development, and if you want to look at your Canvas site, those who are my students, so this is on the Canvas site also, but there's these 8 things that you want to look at, because we're in a course, we're in an actual course here. So it's reading and writing for adults in a class. So character development is something you want to know. Who are the people in the story? What is the conflict is the second thing that you look at. Whose point of view is the story written in? What are the vocabulary words and the choices that the author made? And the next thing is the sequence of events. In a story, it basically goes from beginning, middle, and end. And as we talked, there's some other quirky little things that authors use. It can be a flashback to a past event or a flash forward to an event in the future. But that's that you're aware of the fact that that's happening. The setting is really important. The plot is really important, and the theme. And we talked about all of those last week. This week, we're going to look at nonfiction articles. And just by looking at the elements of nonfiction, you'll see where there's a totally different way of analyzing it. There's the main idea of what's presented. There's the subject matter, which is very important. What is the author of the article, or it could be a biography too. What are they trying to tell us? What information are we getting? It's not a story. It's more of information about a character. It could be, like I said, it could be a biography, but it's something that most importantly, it's telling you information about that person, not just a story. And when I say the subject matter is very important, you'll also see in nonfiction there's a lot of dates. Dates are very important. When was somebody born? When did they die? When did they succeed to Congress or something like that? So the subject matter it's a true story, or it's informational. The third thing is supporting details about what the main idea of the article is. Then there's a conclusion that we're looking for. How does it end? There are clarifying devices. What kind of form is it? Are they using a historical fiction where there are true events but the characters are not true? Is it just informational, something that comes out of a textbook perhaps, that's telling you about a certain event or story? I'm sorry, I shouldn't say story like that. I just want to, is it informational, telling you about something? I'm going to show you about hurricanes in a few minutes. But it also has actual stories involved in it to explain certain things. So you'll get what I mean with the clarifying devices in a minute. It also has vocabulary like fiction, but the vocabulary is in context in a nonfiction article. They pretty much explain it for you in a nonfiction article. You don't have to put your own interpretation with it. And most of the nonfiction articles are not emotional. You don't look for tone or plot or anything like that an author might make you feel sorry for, say, a character. That's not part of nonfiction. They're just telling you maybe about the Curies that were scientists or something like that. They're just giving you the facts, ma'am, that kind of thing in a nonfiction. So to illustrate that, I'm going to just read you two little short excerpts from two different articles. And I know you can't see them, and I will read them to you, but I'm going to put these up so you can kind of see where you could get confused a little bit. This article says the history of the jack-o'-lantern. And at first you might think that this is a nonfiction article, but what it does is it tells you the story of Stingy Jack. And I'm going to read that to you, and then I'm going to also put this one up, which is the history of Halloween. They both seem to be the same kind of an article, but if I read to you this short little piece about the reason to have a jack-o'-lantern, I think and then I read you a little excerpt from this other one, you'll get the sense of which one's fiction, a made-up story, and which one is giving you some real details that is a fiction article. So I'm going to read the first one that's called History of the Jack-o'-Lantern. it says, the practice of a jack-o'-lantern originated from an Irish myth about a man nicknamed Stingy Jack. According to the story, Stingy Jack invited the devil to have a drink with him. True to his name, Stingy Jack didn't want to pay for his drink, so he convinced the devil to turn himself into a coin that Jack could use to buy their drinks. Once the devil did so, Jack decided to keep the money and put it into his pocket next to a silver cross, which prevented the devil from changing back into his original form. Jack eventually freed the devil under the condition that he would not bother Jack for 1 year and that should Jack die, he would not claim his soul. The next year, Jack again tricked the devil into climbing into a tree to pick a piece of fruit. While he was up in the tree, Jack carved a sign of the cross into the tree's bark so that the devil could not come down until the devil promised Jack not to bother him for 10 more years. Soon after, Jack died. As the legend goes, God would not allow such an unsavory figure into heaven. The devil, upset by the trick Jack had played on him and keeping his word not to claim his soul, would not allow Jack into hell. He sent Jack off into the dark night with only a burning coal to light his way. Jack put the coal in a carved out turnip, not a pumpkin, a turnip, and has been roaming the earth with it ever since. The Irish began to refer to this ghostly figure as Jack of the Lantern, and that's where we get jack-o'-lantern. Now that, I want you to think about it. Is this a true story, or is it a made-up story? And if you see the obvious, this is fiction. It's a made-up story. We have characters, we have a plot, the characters are Jack and the devil. We have a beginning, middle, and end, but it's a made-up story. On this one, that also uses the term history. On this one, it starts, and it's a two-pager, but I'm going to just tell you just one of the key things that I wanted you to see. It says, the ancient origins of Halloween. Halloween's origins date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. The Celts who lived 2,000 years ago in the area that is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France celebrated their new year on November 1st. This day marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with human death. Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and dead became blurred. On the night of October 31st, they celebrated Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to earth. In addition to causing trouble and damaging crops, Celts thought that the presence of the otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids or Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. For a people entirely dependent on the volatile natural world, these prophecies were an important source of comfort and direction during the long, dark winter. To commemorate the event, the Druids built huge sacred bonfires where the people gathered to burn crops and animals and offered animals as sacrifices to the Celtic deities. During the celebration, the Celts wore costumes typically consisting of animal heads and skins and attempted to tell each other's fortunes. When the celebration was over, they relit their hearth fires, which they had extinguished earlier that evening from the sacred bonfire, to help protect them during the coming winter. And it goes on through this article, and I've posted both of these on our Canvas site, so you can read about, and it gets into turnips and pumpkins and things like that when these people immigrate to America, because when you think about it, they were farmers in the old countries that they came from, and then when they come to the United States, it's a tough winter and we go through Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims and all of that. But the idea that at this time period, October 31st into November 1st, these people it's happening right at the harvest time. So whatever they did plant and it survived, their food is used in these festivals that they have at the time. So this is a nonfiction article. It's telling you about the beliefs of a person that we know through research, through scientific discoveries and things like that. So it's not a made-up story. It's based on scientific research, and it's giving you details on why do we even celebrate this holiday. And so that makes it different from the story I read to you about Stingy Jack. So there's two examples about the difference between fiction and nonfiction. So what I want to do with, actually my Thursday class is meeting face-to-face this week for the first time from 12 to 1:30. And what we're going to look at is a nonfiction article this week, because The Outsiders is part of what we were doing for fiction. And I want to show you a picture today. And you may not have heard about this particular being. And I know some of my class from past years, some of the same students I have now, are really good artists. And I'm presenting this to them. Please, please draw me this god who is Mayan. And he's well respected, he was well respected in the Caribbean. And if you can look at the picture, he has horns, of course, up at the top, horns. There are skulls that are dangling from his outfit, I guess I'd call it. And then he has skulls that are variously wrapped around like a belt. Then there's the leg on this side, but this side, what does it look like to you? And if you could see it, I don't know if you can see it, I can see it from the studio, but maybe you can't. But this is swirling wind, and there are people falling from what should be his leg, right? This is the god Huracan. Huracan. Let me say it that way, Huracan. So we actually are going to read about hurricanes today, and I'll show you how that nonfiction article, which comes out of our textbook, and that's another good clue that this is a nonfiction article, because most of our textbooks that have a subject area, especially science or social studies, that's nonfiction. You can see other things that are nonfiction in newspaper accounts and things like that, but this is the god Huracan. All right, so let me just present to you. I showed you the elements, but these are some questions. When we start the hurricane article, this is a good, it's colorful too, I like it. The idea of what is nonfiction. So nonfiction tells us about something that's real. It includes true facts. It often has photographs or even drawings, things like that. Includes text features such as captions, headings, and labels. So you'll see sections in the article that are covering one particular part of the main article. It teaches you something. It comes at all levels. So a lot of times we differentiate. We give people different articles about the same topic in a level that's easier for them to read. We want them to be not struggling to get the information on a nonfiction article. Nonfiction can be about people, animals, places, history, plants, science, jobs, sports, everything. You can think of anything that you would be interested in reading. There's a nonfiction article that can help you find out more about it. So anytime you've asked a question, I wonder why the sky is blue, something like that, you can definitely find a nonfiction article written by a scientist or someone who's researched it, and it will tell you why. So you can usually find your answers in nonfiction. After today, we're also going to look at how can you tell the difference between a fact and opinion, because not everything you read is factual. It could be somebody's opinion. So that's another part of our reading and writing for adults. So, so take a look. If you have your notebooks, think about what I've just said. If you have any questions while I'm talking, give us a call, and they'll get the message to me, and I'll go over something, because I can talk too fast sometimes. Okay, so this is nonfiction. Something's real, true facts. There are pieces of the article that could help you with diagrams, photos, other parts. It's not just text. There's usually something else to help you understand it, especially in science and social studies. And now? Okay, so here is our first part of this, this article. Okay, so it says, hurricanes were named long ago by a Caribbean island people who blamed the devastating storms of Hurricane, their god of evil. In Australia, hurricanes are called cyclones or willies. In India, they are typhoons. In parts of Mexico, they are called condonazo, and that means lash of a whip. So right from the beginning of this article, you can see that we are talking about a hurricane. You can almost see that the author's intent of writing this was, he had a question first himself, and where he said, I wonder why there are hurricanes. And he went even further and said, I wonder what they're called. I know it's a big wind, but why is it called a hurricane? What's the difference between a hurricane and a cyclone and a typhoon or a tornado? I mean, this person who wrote this article really looked into the very beginnings, the origin of the name even. So in the article, though, to help us, this is in bold print, the name of the god. There is a god called Hurricane, and that's where the word hurricane comes from. It developed into, that is that big wind that came and almost wiped out off our island in the Caribbean. They don't just assume it's the weather in these ancient times. They think it's a god that got mad at them, and whether the god existed before or after the event, they blame natural weather on this god from the Caribbean islands, and also the Mayans believed in Hurricane. So and they make sure that they're saying he's a god of evil, because they know what the destruction is, how powerful it is, that a source of wind like that comes in and kills people and things. So it sort of fits, doesn't it? Why that kind of a wind, that strong wind, would be named after their god of evil and destruction and things like that. But then they also mention Australia has their own word for a hurricane. They call it a cyclone or a willies. So each group has their own language, and they make sense of their language and calling the things that happen to them that they can't have anything, they can't stop it. So each group has a different name. So a typhoon in India is the same thing as a hurricane in the Caribbean Sea. They just have their own language and they call it something else. In Mexico, it's condonazo, and for them, it's the lash of a whip. So you can almost see that, because when you use a whip, it makes that sound, and some people I've heard, it sounds like a freight train or something coming in. So he deals with the name first, and you can kind of bet on it. It's that makes sense. you have to think to yourself, is this man making this up? Well, no, we had a picture of the god, and there have been those images found on some of the Mayan temples and things like that, with the horned god and then the skulls and things like that, because he creates death. Next paragraph. Hurricanes form over tropical oceans. So now we're getting a place, we're saying, okay, so these winds, maybe that explains why we don't have hurricanes here in North Adams. We're not near tropical oceans. Hurricanes form over tropical oceans when high surface water temperatures are about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a fact. That's not just, well, sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. No, if the water temperature is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and you're in a tropical ocean, there's a strong possibility that a hurricane is going to form. And we know there are more hurricanes now than there ever has been, because the earth is warming up. We've been listening about climate change and things like that. We know the ocean has raised in temperature as a normal temperature at least 4 to 5 degrees now. Our oceans are getting warmer. Okay, so let me start again. Hurricanes form over tropical oceans when high surface water temperatures, about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, cause the evaporation of massive quantities of water. So we are in a science article, but that high temperature of the water causes the ocean water to evaporate, and a large quantity of water. So the water evaporates. What happens when the water evaporates? It turns into water vapor, and it goes into the atmosphere. So that's the part of it. This provides the tropical atmosphere with a rich supply of water vapor. The moist air is carried aloft where it condenses. That means it turns into water droplets and releases latent heat. So you've got water droplets that are evaporating. They're moving it up into the atmosphere, and they're releasing a lot of heat. This warming strengthens the updraft, creating a low pressure area in the lower atmosphere. The surrounding air then moves into this low pressure region, which in turn provides more energy, from the condensation of even more lifted water vapor. Another ingredient in the formation of hurricanes is the convergence of winds blowing from different directions. These winds collide and create a pileup of air. The air at the center of the collision moves upward, becoming an updraft. Rising air and convergence create ordinary thunderstorms. So we have had thunderstorms around here, but as more hot updrafts rise into the storms, the clouds grow larger. Several thunderstorms might cluster together to become what they call a tropical disturbance. So everything is extreme. And think about it, when we have thunderstorms, it's the same idea, but we don't have the water. We don't have that heated tropical water that's also being part of the air swirling around and coming in from all directions. So the first stage is this business of picking up the water, having it evaporate, and then move into the air in large quantities and release the heat. So we're getting a lower temperature and a hot temperature that causes air to move around. You see it on weather maps, how they talk about low pressure and high pressure and winds coming towards our eastern shore from the west and things like that. So that's the first part of it. It's over tropical water. The temperature of the water has to be 80 degrees, and then all of this starts. The next stage occurs when the developing thunderstorm cluster begins to swirl, a movement caused not only by the wind, but by the rotation of the earth. So because it's so much water and so much energy happening, and the temperatures, all of that builds, and the earth actually now has something bigger to move. And once you get something big moving, it's hard to stop it. So it gets turning with the rotation of the earth. So this, you can see how scientific this is. This is not caused by hurricane, some god of evil, right? It's the earth, it's the temperature of the water, it's the wind, it's how evaporation happens with water. And this is how it becomes a major hurricane, because it doesn't start out, it's starting. When the swirling winds reach sustained speeds of 23 miles per hour, the disturbance is called a tropical depression. So at 23 miles an hour, it's not a hurricane, it's a tropical depression. When the wind speeds reach 40 miles per hour, it is called a tropical storm. At 74 miles per hour, then it's a hurricane. So when you hear, we've had some reports of major storms coming through here. Never a hurricane, but it was, they're watching for it always. The weathermen are always watching for it. And they start talking about miles per hour, and you can see them. Next time you see something on the news, on a weather report, and it's maybe out in a lot of them are in Florida now. I watch it. My grandson lives down there, and so I really watch those storms coming in near Mexico, Gulf of Mexico too. But they look at the mile per hour, and as I say, when it has to reach 74 miles per hour. It's not, that's a hurricane. So anything over 74 miles per hour, 74 and up, is a hurricane, according to the scientists. Hurricanes last approximately 5 to 7 days. So it's a buildup out on the ocean over water, over warm water. The warmer it is, the worse it will be. And it comes inland, but it's swirling because of all of those other factors and the rotation of the earth. So it's kind of hard to stop it. When they cross land or cool ocean water, they lose their oceanic moisture source, and their energy providing latent heat decreases. So that's when the storm starts slowing down. Because when it gets over, if the water is hot, when it hits the land is cooler, and it starts cooling this big mass of energy and air and heat. It cools it down, and it starts slowing down, and it loses its intensity and dies out. Now, before I change this page, notice again, I've got numbers that you could almost make a chart of this very simply. You could make a chart at 23 miles an hour, it's a tropical depression. At 40 miles per hour, it's a tropical storm. And then at 74 miles per hour, it's called a hurricane. And that's a scientific article for, that you've got numbers, you've got names given to certain types of storms, but you've also got in this article the bold print. So when you see something in a bold print, they want you to stop and say, that must be important. So if you're taking notes and you're reading an article for a class, you want to write down all those bold print words, because the article is probably going to have a quiz at the end, especially in a course of science, and they're going to ask you perhaps some questions that have to do with what would you call a storm that is 40 miles per hour, has 40 miles per hour winds. And if it started over a heated water mass, tropical water mass, then you could easily say it's a tropical storm. So really look at your articles because they try to help you out with bold print or headings in the story. All right. So let me show you actually what they're going to be asking you after we look at this. 6. Okay. No, I'm missing my first. Okay. It's over here. So after this article, you would have a quiz. Let me get my quiz. So one of the things they might ask you is, what's the main idea of this article? So if, as I showed you before, fiction is looking for why did they write this article? You can usually figure out the idea of the article by what the title is of the article. The main, and in this quiz, they're telling you, mark what is the main idea of this article, mark the statement that is too broad, mark the statement that is too narrow. So look at, can you see it? Yeah, you should be able to see it. So here's a statement, and we're looking for the main idea of the article, what the article's all about. Hurricanes form over warm oceans. B, many storms form over warm oceans. Or C, most air rises over warm oceans. And let me see if I can get my marker here somewhere. So look at that. Try to figure out what is the main idea, what is too narrow. It's not, it could be just a fact, but it's not the whole article. Here we go. So I'm going to put M at what the main idea is. So is it hurricanes form over warm oceans? Is it many storms form over warm oceans? Or is it moist air rises over warm oceans? Well, I told you to kind of look at what the title of the article was. And the title was Hurricanes. So actually A, hurricanes form over warm oceans, would be the main idea. Oh, that was not working. Let me see. So A is the main idea. Hurricanes form over warm oceans. M. Many storms form over warm oceans. Is that we can eliminate main idea. So what would this be? Would this be too broad a title or too narrow a title? This would be too broad a title. If you made that the main idea or the title, you'd have to explain every single storm that occurs over warm oceans. And that's not exactly what this article is about. It's just, that's probably true, but it's not what this article is about. This article is explaining about hurricanes. So it's too broad. You'd have to put too much information. You could, if you wrote a whole book about storms over warm oceans, you could write a lot more, but it's too broad. And this one's too narrow. Moist air rises over warm oceans. It's too narrow. It doesn't even go into detail about the other factors. It doesn't tell you how hurricanes were called, were named after Huracan, right? So this one is too narrow. So is just the first question about main idea. The second thing is what we're looking for in a nonfiction article, and it has to do with the subject matter. And it says, this passage is mainly about how hurricanes got their names, the dangers of hurricanes, storm safety, or the formation of hurricanes. So if you look at the first part, it says how hurricanes got their names. That was one paragraph. That was just one paragraph. That's one of those too narrow answers. Does it tell you about the dangers of hurricanes? Yeah, we heard about that, but not a lot about that. But we kind of know that from our own personal knowledge, but it really didn't go into detail about the dangers of hurricanes, so that's not even what was talked about. Is it about how to keep safe during a hurricane? No. And so you kind of eliminate the ones that it's not about, and you get to the formation of hurricanes. And yeah, that's definitely what it was about, because they went into great detail to tell you how fast the wind blew, and when a hurricane actually occurs is at 74 miles per hour. So D is the answer for this one. The subject matter was about the formation of hurricanes. Oops. The next thing we're looking at with a nonfiction article is supporting details that help the author tell the story. And so this one asks the question, when wind speeds of a disturbance reach 74 miles an hour, the storm is called what? Is it A, an ordinary thunderstorm? Is it a tropical storm? Is it a hurricane? Is it a tropical depression? And as I say, if you wrote yourself a little chart while you were reading this, you could look back at your notes and you'd say, oh, 74 miles an hour, look at your chart, it's got to be a hurricane. And C would be the correct answer here. For number 4, over which of the following would a hurricane most likely not lose strength? Now, these are the tricky questions that you're going to see on a high-set test. You really, really have to look at the question and see what is it the question actually says. Because if you don't notice that not, what you're doing here is you're saying, over which of the following would a hurricane not lose strength? So we know it loses strength over land, right? We know that because we just read that. But it says not lose strength. Would it be Mexico? That's country. That's a country. B, a tropical sea. C, the east coast of the United States. The cold North Atlantic Ocean. Which one would it not lose strength over? So with this one, we're looking at what is not a warm sea, because that's where they form, and they keep getting bigger and bigger if they stay out to sea. You'll hear a weatherman say that. If it doesn't come in, it's going to be building and building and building for 5 or 6 days, it said. So it's definitely tropical sea. If it stays out above the sea, the warm tropical sea at 80 degrees, it's not going to lose any strength if it stays out there. So B is the answer here. So this is the kind of question they ask for a clarifying device. And it's mainly, it has a lot to do with what we would call setting in a fiction article. But in a nonfiction article, it's the way the author chooses to write the information. So it says, the information in this passage is mainly presented through a historical perspective. So you have to think about that. At the very beginning, we learned a little bit of historical perspective because of that God of evil. And that we know was in ancient times. But it stops right there. That's just to explain the name of where they get the idea of a hurricane. So it's not A. Is it a personal narrative? In other words, did the author tell you about surviving a hurricane themselves and give a real description of what happened when the house next door's roof flew off or something? And that would still be nonfiction because it would have been something true that happened and detailed in the whole day of, it could have been when he got up in the morning and the warnings were coming in about the hurricane hitting and things like that. That would still be nonfiction, but is the author a person in the story that he's recounting what happened in a hurricane to him or her? No, we don't see that. Is it an explanation of a process? Do we know how a hurricane starts and how it builds and what happens along the way and how it stops? Do we know all about that? And yes, it's a process. So for the way the story is told gives you an idea of what the clarifying device is. And it is a process. The other one is a descriptive account. It could have been a person watching a hurricane come in. And that would have been maybe a reporter that is there. But this one is definitely a process. So C. The vocabulary that we came across in this article was the term convergence. And we should be able to understand what the word means by looking back at the article. Let me see where it is, and I'll show you what it said. So when you have these kinds of questions, it's best to look back at the article. You usually can do that. They let you. And to reread where it said the word convergence. So it says here, another ingredient in the formation of hurricanes is the convergence of winds blowing from different directions. So you have to think about it, but it's right there. It tells you what it is. We know winds easily form when you just blow out of your mouth. You have, especially in winter, you can see it. It goes in a direction. But they're saying winds are blowing from different directions. Now, what happens if you think through the idea of winds blowing in different directions? Say there's 3 or 4 of you, and you're all, whistling or something like that. The wind from each person's mouth is blowing and hitting into each other, and that's the meaning of convergence. They come together, they converge, they hit, and then what happens, they come together, but they bounce off into another direction, and they're part of each other, and you don't know where they're going, right? So the idea of convergence with a lot of different winds coming from a lot of directions, which one is this? Is it the act of coming together? Is it clouds that produce rain and thunder? Is it the process of water vapor changing into liquid? Is it an updraft? So what do you think it is? Let's do a process of elimination. You may not know what an updraft is, so hold on to that. Is it the process of water vapor changing into liquid? No, the sentence that convergence was in didn't have anything to do with water vapor changing into liquid, so you get rid of C. Is it clouds that produce rain and thunder? No, we get rid of that too. That wasn't part of the paragraph. They were talking about wind. So it's got to be the act of coming together, or it's an updraft. So let's look at the term updraft. Well, with all the winds coming together, they first come together, and then heat is released, and then the warming of the air, all the wind coming together, that causes the updraft. So it's not updraft. So what are we left with? So we know it's not the clouds, it's not the process, it's not the updraft. We're left with, it means a convergence of things is the act of things coming together. And that's the answer for 6. Okay, so let me put this back up here. Okay, so today we talked about the different elements of analyzing fiction as opposed to analyzing nonfiction. I hope you see how that all is different. You're not looking for characters, although there was a character in this nonfiction. We heard about the god of evil, Hurricane. But what was the main idea of this article? It was to teach us about hurricanes as a force of nature and how they're formed, because it's basically physics in a way. What makes things move? And you're dealing with water, you're dealing with wind, you're dealing with the concepts of heat. Climate change comes into it because the oceans are getting warmer, so that would make it more frequent to have more hurricanes. That was the subject matter in that article. Totally, they usually zero in on one particular thing, and this one did. It was just hurricanes. They didn't get into tornadoes and things that are formed over land. This is a storm that's formed over heated tropical sea with the wind and the all the things that happen to the water vapor and those important vocabulary words come in context at the end here. The supporting details are all of the data that is in this article, because it's a science article. And there is also a video that I will put on the site so you can see it actually happen and how strong that 74-mile-an-hour wind is, because it does. It takes roofs off of houses, and if you're in a tropical island, imagine, I mean, remember what happened in Puerto Rico. It just stayed out to sea and then it hit, and it's, I wonder anyone was alive. Where do you go when you're on an island, right? The conclusion is it started with how does it form, and then how does it stop? You know, it doesn't go on forever. They said they gave you a time limit of, I think it said 5 or 6 days, 5 or 6 or 7 days. I think it was 5 to 6 days. I'll have to look back. But again, rereading is really important when you're analyzing a nonfiction article, because you know you're going to, if they put it in bold print, if they give you headings, you know there's going to be some questions about it. Especially for the science and social studies test, there's also going to be, like I say, I have the video that is on Canvas, but you'll also see some charts and things that will be there, and they might ask you questions to say, as I said, what's a 40-mile-an-hour storm called? And then remember the clarifying devices, because that's the way the author chooses to tell the information. It's not a story. It's information, details that you can count on to be factual. And you can with analyzing fiction, you can almost go back to the old fairy tale kind of thing. Once upon a time, nonfiction won't do that. They'll tell you, this about a certain storm. Another thing that wasn't in this story, and I did want to comment to you, is now at the beginning they called hurricanes this kind of storm after that god of evil, which is a myth. Someone made it up to explain a natural cause. But our hurricanes now are called by names, first names. And at the beginning of the year, the first hurricane is named after a boy or a girl. And if they're really bad storms, they don't use the name again. Hurricane Andrew is one that comes to mind, and they'll never call another hurricane by that name. So thank you for being with me today. I hope I made it a little clearer on the difference between fiction and nonfiction. This has to go along with our reading, but we're going to also be doing writing, where you're going to have to explain certain things that you read in a class, and you're going to have to understand these are the terms that you will see in the questions and in your answers. You need to use the vocabulary words that are found in the story, and they'll know that you read it and reread it. And that is one more tip. When you're doing the tests, you want to be looking, they call it survey the whole article, survey the questions. If it's about an article, about a topic, subject matter that you have no interest in, you still can get interested in it if you know the questions they're going to ask you at the end. It gives you a reason to read it. You know what the questions are going to be. Look for those answers as you read it the first time, and then reread it to answer the questions. They always let you go back and reread the article. So I hope you'll join me next week, and we'll be talking more about writing answers for our reading. So thanks again, and see you next week.